Video, I am going to go through the components that we can use to build pages in Saltcorn. In the last video, I showed you how to set up an application in Saltcorn and how to create a very simple page. So in this video, we'll go into a little bit more detail about building pages. If you don't remember how to get here, how to set up pages in Saltcorn, go back to the last video. It was called Saltcorn Introduction, creating a simple page, and you can see how to get here. So here I am going to create a new page. We will call it page 2, and remember to set the role that is required to access the page. And then I am going to go through these components. So let's start with the two components that we saw last time, columns and the text component. So you drag in a component like this, and then over here in the settings you can change the component that you've just dragged into the canvas or the component that you've just selected. Here for the columns, I can select a number of columns, so I can select I might have 3 columns, and for each of those, so you can see here now this is dropped in with 3, and I can drop something in each of these columns, each of these 3 columns. So if we go back to the settings for the columns, below I can set the width of each of these. So the width is, if you imagine the screen is divided into 12 columns, 12 sort of elementary columns, then you can choose how many of those elementary columns your new columns will take up. So we might want to make the first one half the content, so that is 6 out of 12 columns, and the last 2, let's make that 3. So the last column, you never set the width, it is always 12 minus the other widths from the other columns here. The other thing you can set for each column is the breakpoint, and what that means is at what screen width do these stop being columns next to each other and do they fall underneath each other. So I'm actually going to show that. We need to save the page and then I can view it in a new tab. So I'm now in a different tab where I'm seeing the page that I'm building. So let's go back here just so we can distinguish these 3 columns. Let's give these some extra text. And you always have to save. And then we refresh over in this tab. Okay, so now little trick here is that if you choose inspect in your browser, this works both in Chrome and in Firefox. I'm in Firefox here. You get the sort of web developer tools, and here you can switch to a mobile view. So in Firefox, it's over here with the little mobile phone symbol, and if you're doing that on a screen that's this size, then you probably want to put these control panels to the left or to the right. There we go. So now I can switch what device I am changing. If this doesn't come up, then try reloading the page or try pressing this a couple of times. But eventually here you will be able to choose a different device. And all of the ones we're looking at now are narrow, but we can also have an iPad. So here you see that we have the columns are next to each other instead of being above each other. And now if I go back to the builder, and if I set these to, let's say, a large screen, and hit save, then if I reload on the iPad emulation, they will be above each other instead of next to each other. So that's what the breakpoint does. It's really useful when you are thinking about creating a page that works both on desktop, on tablet, and on mobile. Okay, let's look at the text component. I already have 3 text components in here that I have dragged into my columns. So if I want to change anything about those, I click here and then I have the settings on the right. If I want to change the text, I can click on this text to display. I can type something else, whatever I want. And above that, I have some rich text editing settings. So if I can do standard stuff that you might find in a word processor. You can make this bold. You can make this italic. You can do various other things here. So there's a lot of options here. You can set it to, you know, typewriter font, computer code. There's a lot of functionality here. You can play around with it. You can even do bullet points. And so there are a lot of options here. You can experiment with them yourself. Below that, I have some other settings that I can use. So despite the fact that we set the bold up here, I have another way here of setting the text style, so into different header styles. Again, I can set the bold here. Whatever you set in this text style applies to the whole text. So if I just go back here and I undo some of the trouble that I caused here, and let's get rid of all this typewriter stuff. And you can see here that if we set it to a heading 4, you can see it's updated over here in the display for the page. And I can do small, I can do italics, etc. So you might ask, what's the difference between setting something in bold using this text style and then using the bold in the rich text editor controls? And there isn't that much difference. There is a very minor point, which is that if you come later to translate your application into multiple languages, then Saltcorn gets confused if you have the bold settings in here. So if you can just use the text style here, and it will be easier down the line if you want to translate your application. But if you don't think you want to do that, you can also use the bold here, and of course it gives you more flexibility because you can set individual words to be bold. You can also set the icon. So if you want to put an icon in, you can search for one. Let's say I want this paper plane. And if you just wanted an icon, you can delete all the text. And there you go. Now you just got the you've just got the icon here. You can also set the font. So if instead you want, this has to be a font that your browser recognizes. So if you want to set, you know, Times New Roman or whatever you think you might have installed. And we'll see later how you can upload new fonts and change the fonts that are available. The last setting here is the block display, and that's something that is quite common in a lot of these components. And what that means is that it will appear on a line of its own. So it will not have an element next to it. So I've just dragged in another text component here next to the one I am editing. And if I then set this to have the block display, then the next text goes down below. All right, so you can, and so if either of the two elements here has block display enabled, then they will appear on distinct lines. So I can do the same here with this one. Instead of block displays, the other thing you can do is use this line break component over here. If you drag that in between two elements, then they will appear, there will be a line break and they will appear on distinct lines again. It shows up in the editor, but not in the page. So here you don't see it here, but you see it in the previous one. Let's talk a little bit about code. It is simply embedding HTML code. So if I know the HTML for something I want to put, then I can just type it in this box. And there you go, there's your HTML. You know, sometimes you need it and it's there when you do. Okay, let's delete that. Let's talk about cards. Cards are nice little display units that have a border and appear on a white background. You've seen cards lots in Google applications, Twitter. A card is sort of a distinct visual element that really does look like a card, yes, in a business card. You can set a title, and then it will have a title up here. It is a container element. As such, you can drag stuff into it. So now my card here has a title, my card, and in its body it has the text "Hello World," but that could be anything. You can have columns inside cards, etc. You can also set a URL so that when I click that, then I go to that page, right? So if I now save this, let's go to our page, which is displaying this. If I then click on the card, I get taken to saltcorn.com. I should probably put the protocol in front of that. And there you go. Okay, so anywhere clicking on the card will take you to that URL. You can also set whether there's a shadow, and you can remove this padding. Later on, we'll see how to use the container element to set any padding you want to. So let's talk about the box here. It's a very powerful adjustment, but let's talk about it when we get to the container. Images we've already talked about. Let's just make this a little bit more equal. We've talked about images. I can drop that in here. Images can come from the files that are in the system, or they can come from a URL. So if there's a public image, you can use that, or you can upload new images. Remember to set the alt text for people who use screen readers, and again, images can have the block setting, so they will appear with no elements next to them. Links are links to URLs. You can set the text that appears in the link, and then the source, which you can link to a page. So I can link to my other page here, or I can set it to any URL anywhere on the internet for an external link. And the other thing I can do is I can choose that this should appear not as a link, but as a button. So if I can set different styles of buttons, large button, small button, block that takes up the whole width. And I can, using these different keywords, I have different colors, but if I want, you can see here, if I want a custom color, I can choose that, and then I can set the background. I can set the background to somewhere. So you can set different colors here. All right, so you set those independently. A couple of other settings for links. Nofollow tells search engines not to treat this link as an authority or as a reference. You can also choose that clicking the link should open a new tab, and again, the block display. Okay, the view I am not going to talk about, because views are how you tie tables and table data into the pages, and to make sense of how the views work, I first have to cover how tables work and how you can create views, and only then can we see how to embed views on pages. So I will leave that to another video. The search bar is a way to set up search across the website. So it is a global full text search for your website. SaltCon has this way of configuring search. You have to do this through the site structure menu. I'm just going to open this in a different tab. And here in search, you can choose how your application is searched. Again, you have to do this through creating views of data in tables. The search bar has this drop-down functionality where you can add things to a container that is enabled inside the search bar. And so you can build up a whole little menu inside the search bar. Actions are create buttons or links for emitting events or triggering actions in the SaltCon action system. This again will have to be part of another video because it's a large topic. I'll just show you some of the styling options. You can set the text here. And then again, you can change the style into one of these built-in styles, or you can set a custom color for the button. Again, they can have icons, and you can also set the role that is required to display this button, so it will only appear, for instance, for an administrator or for a logged-in user, but not for the public user. When you trigger an action, you've chosen an action, every action will have some kind of configuration, and you can set that here. So for instance, if I choose this button to trigger a webhook action, then I have to specify the URL at which that webhook will contact, and also the body of JSON that will be submitted on that webhook. There's a JavaScript code, so you can enter some JavaScript code here that gets launched and run on the server when you press that button. The tabs component, I'm running out of space here. I think I'm going to put this below my columns. Tabs, very standard, give you multiple tabs that you can choose. So if I have three tabs, then let's say this is, I have to name them. Work, life, school. I get some different contents that people can switch between. So this content will go in a specific tab. Well, let's put an action here. And maybe I've got some JavaScript for taking out the bin or something like that. Okay, so you can see what that looks like. I've got my tabs here. So in each of these tabs, I've got the content that I've dropped in the page builder. You can do it in different styles. So you can also have pills. Pills are just a visually slightly different way of doing tabs. Maybe you like them, but they work the same way as tabs. Accordions work a little bit differently. It is just a different visual style. But so it gives you this, you slide up here. And you can see, so it's a different kind of UI. Component I want to talk about is the container component. It is the most powerful component in terms of making fine adjustments to the look and feel of the application. Before I can show you that, let's clean up a little bit and delete some of these components. Remember, if you get lost and if you're not able to select something, you can always go back down here to the layer settings. And so I wanted to select the tabs, which I had a problem with before, and then I can press the delete button. And let's just delete a few more things here. Okay, so let's drop in a container, and I'm going to put something inside the container. Put a text component inside the container, and now I have selected the container here, and let's talk about the different options you have in the settings for the container. The box section here allows you to adjust properties of what we call the box model, and allows you to set independently margins, borders, padding, and size for the container element. You can do that in any direction, or you can do it for all directions at once. So if I want to change all of the margin, I click on the margin label here. If I wanted to set the margin on the left, I click here on the left, right, bottom, and top. But let's set the margin overall, and let's just give it a 15 pixel margin all around. We can set the border, and again I can set the border in any direction, but I want to set all borders just because it's easier. Let's set a slightly wider border with a funky groove, and I can also set the color of the border to something like that, and I can set the radius for rounded corners. So let's save this and have a look. There you go. There's my container with margin and rounded corners. One thing that you can see here is that the text is very close to the border, and that is precisely what the padding changes. So let's give it a nice little padding of, I don't know, 6. So there we go. That looks better. Right, so the box editor allows you to adjust all of those properties independently, and that's a really powerful way of changing spacing and setting borders. The display allows you to change how that container element is displayed. Again, you can set the block setting. Here you have a few more options than just block or not block. You can set it to flex, and that enables the flexbox properties down below. You can set it to none to have it not displayed. You can set it to block or inline. So let's just set it to the block here. You can, if you know HTML, you'll know that there are different container elements, and you can choose which one is the one that represents our container. There are these alternative container elements, alternatives to div, give you different semantic properties. They don't necessarily look any different, but they give different information to a browser, possibly to a screen reader, and makes it a little bit more obvious to the browser how things are displayed. And then you can set the overflow, according to whether you want the overflow to be shown, not shown, or scroll, or whatever. And you can also, if you have a container at the outer level, you can expand it to the full page width. So that's really nice if you have a background image or some kind of background color. You can just make it go right across the screen by enabling this. But then it should be at the top level. So by that I mean not inside a column. Content, you can rotate the content, you can set the alignment. That's mainly for the text properties. If you have something complicated inside, you should probably use the flexbox properties. And here you can set the background. So here you can set it to an image, some image that we have uploaded. And you can set different ways of having that, the background image. You may know this from HTML. You can also just set the background to a color. So, from an orange color here. Or you can set the background to a gradient. which can be in any direction. So you can get really groovy looking backgrounds like this in your containers. Okay. Now the Flexbox properties, if I had set this to be a flex display, then I get a lot of options in the Flex container. You really have to consult a better authority on the Flexbox model than me to understand what these really mean. I had a lot of fun playing around with these. So basically, if you put a bunch of items inside your container, then the Flexbox model will adjust how that is, how that changes the layout, how it changes the spacing and the alignment of the items. I'd advise you to, if you need this, do go and consult some video on YouTube about the Flexbox model and how it's used, and you'll see that these are the main Flex properties. I might do a more detailed video about the Flex properties. But for now, it's just there for you to experiment with if you want a very flexible layout. And it's in particular, it's flexible across different display widths. You can change whether that container is displayed under certain conditions. So you can set it to be displayed only to certain user roles. So if it is displayed only to admin and staff, but not to the user, then user or public won't see that. You can also set it to be displayed only on certain screen widths, so it can be hidden below a certain screen width or hidden above a certain screen width. And then you can set a link so that you can, when you click on the container, it takes you to some link, which is sometimes useful. And finally, if you need it, if you know some specific CSS or specific class, you can put that in here. Okay, I think that is it from me for this video. I did promise we would move on to tables, but I think I will do one more video where we go through the settings menus and all the things you can configure here just at a very high level, quick run through. Just have a look at how you can configure your application by some of the options inside the settings menu.